and we can go over Blackboard a little bit too. I did the whole thing as an orientation of slides over the syllabus and that, because it usually takes up about, a good 45 minutes of our class time. And since we cut out a week of class, I didn't want to waste it on going over spending our valuable time on just the syllabus and the schedule. But the schedule, we'll talk a little bit more about it as each of you go into labs this week, because I want to make sure that everybody shows up to the right lab. I tried to write it out so that it all makes sense on the syllabus. So I hope it did.
I love the color coordination.
You like the color coding syllabus?
I do.
Good. It takes a lot of time to do that. Everybody's probably like, why does it take her so long to put everything up on Blackboard when they changed everything just after, you have it all set up so that it's 15 weeks and everything's going to divide differently, because we still have to keep pretty much the same content going across 14 weeks. I can't just like say, oh, kidneys, they're not important. I guess we'll cut that out this year.
Right.
So.
Well, thank you for taking the time to do that.
Oh, you're welcome. It is my job after all, right? Should do my job. Try to do it well too. All right, I'm trying to get back here to the beginning of this. All right. All right, so 1 minute to go. I usually try to start class on time. If I'm starting late, it's probably because there's some internet glitch going on. I'm always pretty precise about making sure I get on time. All right, admitting a few others. That's what all this crazy clicking is admitting everybody. Trying to see everybody's names. Usually I pride myself on learning all your names. By about the third class, I usually know who everybody is. It's a little bit harder with online teaching. Okay, so I'm Cynthia Harold. As you'll see, if you've done the orientation in that, I'm actually an MD. I've retired at a relatively young age. I'm 57, but I kind of experienced a little bit of disaster in my life. I had both of my hips spontaneously collapse and break. So I'll probably bring in some of my own x-rays to class when we get to, very soon we're going to get into bones and, show you a little bit about what happened there. Just because it's a valuable learning tool. It's also a valuable learning tool for you as to, you can never count on everything in your career going the way you planned for your career to go. So always, kind of have a backup plan, always do all the things that you need to do, like having your disability insurance. Most people are more likely to use your disability insurance sometime in your lifetime than you are to, just kind of lose your job entirely. It's more like taking your job off for maybe, a few months or something like that, because you've had to have a surgery or something. And that's, I think, one of the things we've all learned this year with COVID, right, is how sickness can really affect our whole financial life. All right, so we're going into anatomy. Most everybody is here for nursing school, but as I said, we always have people in here for a couple other reasons too. So this is going to be the basis or the foundation for everything you do. So it should help. I'm trying to make the class feel a little bit more clinical and relevant to you, and not just some esoteric, science course. So we study the human body, anatomy, its structure, physiology, its functions. And when we study the human body, we classify all living things, humans being part of animals, specifically the vertebrates. And this means that they have a segmented vertebral column. So you'll see how your spine, one long spinal column, is made up of several independent vertebrae, the bones, all right? And the spine itself is segmented. And we won't get to go too much into the embryology and development of that, but these are all characteristics that suggest a same path in evolution for all the vertebrates. All right. We'll also focus a lot throughout this course on the concept of homeostasis. And homeostasis, sometimes when it's written in a textbook, you start to think of it as like this static concept of, you know, your normal temperature is 98.6 and, you know, it remains that, and that's what your temperature is. But, you know, sometimes you get febrile, it goes out of range, and we try to get it back down, back into normal range. Sometimes you can get a little bit cooler than our normal range temperature. It's actually thought that our temperature has actually been overestimated to be a little bit high. There's some recent studies to show that. But regardless, we always try to move back to a normal range. Things like your blood pressure, you know, you think of normal being 120/80. Well, nobody's blood pressure remains static, the same thing at one point in time. Our blood pressure varies throughout the day, depending on what you're doing. It goes up if you're exercising, if you're lying in bed at night, nice and flat and resting, your blood pressure goes down. And homeostasis is this concept that we have all these dynamic movements, but we're always trying to kind of move back to what is our normal set point. So just remember that it's dynamic, constantly changing. We'll look at anatomy and physiology. And anatomy is the easier part of the course, really. It's the real estate. It's the structure, okay? The building. It's the location. You're going to identify what it is, where it's located, and you're going to name it. Physiology will be more focused on in lecture, okay? Anatomy will be a lot of the focus in lab. And physiology is going to be the function, the interactions between cells, how our organ systems work together, okay? So when we look at anatomy as the real estate, the location, you can find it on the map. The physiology is going to be everything in the house that makes it function. Your air conditioning, your plumbing, your, you know, electricity would be your neural system, okay? And I have tried my hardest to stop these closed captionings. I don't know if you can see them. Somehow they did something with Zoom. I think somebody at the college made it so that we all have to have the closed captioning on. It drives me crazy while I'm lecturing. I hope it's not driving you crazy. All right, so anatomy describing the structures, physiology, how everything interacts and is basically the science of life, all right? Physiology is going to be the harder part for most people. Most everybody does okay with anatomy, identifying what it is, where it is, and what to call it. Although a lot of times we have difficulty with the pronunciation. So gross anatomy is the study of the large visible structures. This is a lot of what we're going to be looking at in lab. We're actually going to encounter a real human cadaver, okay? It's already been dissected, so we call that cross-section for demonstration. You're not going to have to cut into a human body, but it will be there for you to, you know, examine the structures. Some people will hate this and will want to avoid it. Some of you will just love, you know, looking at this. So we'll approach the body with your level of comfort. But you do need to realize that, you know, in looking at this, it can help you like a little bit have some knowledge about yourself and your career choices. And you probably don't want to go into the surgical suite if you're really uncomfortable looking at a prosected human body. It's going to be even harder to see cutting into a living human being. Okay. So you might want to, you know, you'll probably have to do some rotations through that, but you might want to avoid it for your career choices. Surface anatomy sometimes gets a little bit of short shrift in anatomy classes, but you know, surface anatomy is actually what we use mostly in our day-to-day examination of patients. Surface anatomy is a lot of what our landmarks are, even to get at the internal anatomy. Like I know when I do anesthesia and when I'm looking to get a central line and to, say somebody's subclavian vein, and I want to go in and I look at the landmarks between the muscles of the neck and the relationship to the clavicle. Okay. When I want to put in an epidural and I have a pregnant lady leaning forward and I can take the line going across from the tops of the hip bones, and it tells me right about where L3 and L4, the third and fourth lumbar spine is. And I can go into the space, the inner space in between those two, and avoid puncturing my needle into somebody's spinal cord, because as you'll learn, your spinal cord ends about the level of L1. All right, regional anatomy is studying just a specific region of the body area. So you could do like head and neck anatomy, okay? And systemic anatomy is looking at the organ systems. You could, focus your efforts on cardiovascular anatomy. Clinical anatomy is really kind of our focus, anatomy with an eye toward how it's going to affect us in our clinical decision-making. Developmental anatomy, certainly, anyone who is maybe interested in ultrasounds and going into OBGYN, if you were an x-ray tech, but who wanted to specialize in like fetal ultrasounds, you would have a key interest in developmental anatomy. And microscopic anatomy is the domain of all those, med techs and histologists and cellular biologists looking at everything down at the cell level. And we're not really going to do a whole lot of that in here, but we will discuss the cell level a little bit in the next few lectures as we put things into the tissues. And we'll spend a lot more time on tissues in the larger class. All right, physiology. We're going to look at cell physiology, the interactions between the cells, how they communicate with each other. An example would be that I have here is in our kidneys that I was going to cut out of the class, right? Kidneys tend to be one of the harder things for people to get to, just as a warning signal. So the renin-angiotensin system, or RAS, helps you to regulate your blood pressure, and your kidneys release some hormones that are sent out and help with regulating that fluid balance that ultimately controls your blood pressure. Whenever you talk about what controls your blood pressure, people always want to say heart, but really your kidneys are probably more key for the blood pressure. The heart generates the pressure of the pump, but your kidney controls the volume that's moving around through the whole circulatory system. Organ physiology is going to be the functions of the specific organs. So we could look again at the kidney and say, oh, it's the main function is to, excrete the waste, making the urine. But it also has several other functions like making important hormones, controlling your fluid volume, and thus your blood pressure. Systemic physiology would be the functions of the entire organ system. So your kidney is part of the urinary system. And so we can look at how all the parts of the urinary system work together. Kidneys making the urine, the ureters delivering it to the bladder, which stores the urine, okay? And then you eliminate it. Pathological physiology, of course, is going to look at how everything can go awry, and we end up with disease states. So you can have a hypertensive crisis, and we can deal with that through modulating the effects of various hormones released by the kidney. So we can give you ACE inhibitors to inhibit the angiotensin converting enzymes that are made by the kidney, or we can control the level of renin that's produced by the kidney. Getting scary, right? All right. Now, something that isn't in your textbook, but I want to talk about it because we'll be talking about this all the time, is what we care about with all this is in treating and seeing our patients. We certainly care about promoting their wellness generally, but in promoting their wellness, what we also want to do is prevent morbidity and mortality. And morbidity is our disease state. Okay, you're not dead yet, right? But you're sick. Mortality, of course, is death. And this is one of these big things with the coronavirus right now. And the idea of the vaccine is, I think people thought a vaccine would prevent mortality, and to some degree it does, but there's still people who are vaccinated that are going to die. But our biggest thing with the vaccination is preventing morbidity, getting really sick. Okay, so we want, vaccine certainly helps with getting real bad sick and ending up in the ICU, having to be either pronated for better breathing, or reaching different recesses of your lungs, or, being intubated, which, is a really bad sign, because people intubated with COVID rarely get extubated and get better. Also, we need to talk about what are signs and symptoms. Okay, so a sign is something that I can look at you and see. I can see that you perhaps have a skin rash. I can see that maybe you're cyanotic, or I can see that, maybe your mouth is drooping, that you had a stroke, something like that. A symptom is something subjectively that a patient feels and reports to you, but you really don't have any objective measure to be able to tell what's going, that they're truly feeling that. Something easier to fake, in other words. Pain, fatigue, numbness. These are sensations that the patient feels. All right, so your book talks about the scientific method, and it refers you, I think, to the appendix to look at it. But you guys have learned the scientific method before. And it's really the empiric collection of data to sort of describe some phenomenon that we're observing. Okay, so you initially observe something, you describe something that's going on out there in the world with a patient. And we're going to use the scientific method as applied to a lot of clinical situations. And the reason we use the scientific method is because it controls all of our bias. Okay, everybody grows up in a culture. We have all of our cultural influences around us. And if we look at things in a non-biased manner scientifically, we can arrive at conclusions that should be consistent across people, aside from all the biases that we might bring into our setting. All right, so the scientific method will have 4 main points to it. First, we're going to observe and describe some phenomena, and then we'll make a hypothesis about it. We might notice that all these people flying over on planes coming from Asia back in, February, were coming in sick. All right. And so we might attribute this to my hypothesis being that there's some either bacteria or virus, some microbe that's causing a respiratory illness in people who traveled from Asia. All right. And then we test, we go searching, we might test people's blood, we might do bronchoscopies and see if we can find things. And of course, we talk with our colleagues over in Asia as to what phenomenon they're observing. So we use our hypothesis to predict the existence or the cause for the phenomena that we're observing. And indeed, in these cases, we discover this relatively novel coronavirus. And then you can perform some experimental tests to see if your predictions hold up. So, in the case of coronavirus, maybe we would take and harvest the virus from people who came back traveling from Asia that were sick, and might give it to experimental animals to see if they too get sick and perhaps die. And if that indeed is the case, voila, you probably have pretty much affirmed your cause. All right. All right, so look at this. What phenomenon do you all observe? This person comes in to see you, Nurse Rhonda. And what do you look at and what do you observe when you see this picture?
Small red dots, inflamed,
Yeah.
I don't know what those are called yet.
Okay, yeah, these are your tonsils back here. This is your uvula,
tonsils.
but you're seeing a red throat, right? And it's inflamed.
Me-
Just you got an angry throat here. Okay.
Right.
So that's your observance. What's your hypothesis? What do you think's going on with this person? We don't want to pick on you totally, Rhonda, so let's pick on somebody else.
Maybe, sorry,
Okay.
tonsillitis.
Strep.
Megan, is that you?
Yeah, sorry. I was just saying maybe strep.
Yeah, okay, maybe it's strep throat. So Megan's hypothesis is strep throat. All right, so does somebody else want to pipe in as to how you're going to test this hypothesis?
Swab.
You're going to swab it.
Yeah, you're going to swab it and do a rapid strep test right there in your office, right? They have pretty good accuracy. I think about 90% sensitivity for picking up strep throat. So, so you swab it and indeed you find out it is strep throat. So you have observed the phenomenon, you made a hypothesis, you tested it, and you got an answer, okay, with your little experiment, right? So this is how we apply the scientific method to our thinking clinically. Okay, too often we get bogged down in all these big giant experiments. So you do this for clinical decision making. So we did this here. You can, you're going to note all the signs that you observe. You're going to note all the symptoms the patient describes. You make your hypothesis, you test it. Okay. All right. Now, our body is organized at different levels of organization, and we're going to look at all these in this course. The part that's going to be a little bit difficult here at first is we're going to have to do some macromolecule, some chemical review. So we'll start out, we're all made of atoms, which are then organized into molecules. Those molecules associate with each other to form our macromolecules. So we can have our individual atoms, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, right? And they'll associate to form molecules like water, glucose, glycine, okay? And then they'll form macromolecules like carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, okay? We'll also look at the cellular level. So we're going to have all of our cells, which are composed of all these atoms, these molecules making up subcellular organelles, and the organelles are organized into the larger membrane-bound cell. And then our cells of similar type get organized into forming tissues that work together. Then we move up from the tissues, all being organized into the organ, which will be different tissues that work together to serve a particular function. Okay. And then our organs work together as part of the organ system, like the kidney, the ureters, the bladder, all working together in the urinary system, of which we have 11 organ systems. And all of our organ systems together form the whole entire organism, which in, my case is a human being, I hope. I'm not a zombie yet, right? Some days I feel like one though. All right, so this is your level, and I'll tell you, pretty regular test question is always go from the smallest to the largest level or from the largest to the smallest level. And it might not always be obvious. Where people get tripped up is sometimes at the tissue, organ system level, okay? All right, so our organ systems, just to give you a preview of what we're gonna go through, is the integumentary system. Everybody pretty much likes this when we talk about this. Your skin, your hair, the associated glands, sweat glands, sebaceous glands, fingernails. We won't go into that too in depth, although your fingernails can give clues to your health status. And, you know, the general function of the integumentary system is it's going to be the boundary between you and the external world. It protects you against all the environmental hazards. Your body's kind of turtle waxed down with all the literally waxed down sebaceous dead cells that are on your skin. It's going to help you regulate your temperature. You sweat when it's hot, you shiver when it's cold. It'll help you provide sensory information as you interact with the world around you, tell you whether the temperature is hot outside. You know, you can feel the wind and the breeze blowing, all those important things that you need to know. The skeletal system, everyone pretty much likes these too. Learning the bones can be really, really difficult. So your bones are attached with cartilages, right? They have cartilage on the ends of your bones. You're going to have ligaments attaching a bone to a bone. You'll have tendons attaching your bones and muscles together. And all this skeletal system and your musculoskeletal system together is often spoken of kind of as a combined system, will provide support and protection for all of your internal organs, right? It's the structure basically on which everything else is suspended. It'll store important minerals like calcium and phosphorus, and the marrow in your bones is where our blood cells are formed. So, you know, a lot of functions you don't think about, but very important for providing the structure, ultimately for movement, along with the muscular system, which comes next, okay? So our muscles will provide the actual motor function, the movement, and they also will help protect and support other tissues. You don't have a skeleton over your abdominal contents, but you have layers and layers of muscle, which will, you know, offer protection to your internal organs that are in your abdominal region. Your muscles also will generate heat, okay? As they move and expend energy, that energy that is utilized is dissipated as heat that keeps our body warm. Our nervous system will be comprised of our brain, the spinal cord, all the peripheral nerves, you know, going sensory or motor out to our periphery, and all the specialized sense organs, things like your eye, your ear, detecting all these important sensory information. So your nervous system is going to sort of coordinate the activities of all of the other organ systems. It'll work in conjunction with your endocrine system to kind of interpret a lot of the sensory information and adjust changes in your body and respond to various stimuli. So we'll kind of keep the nervous system and the endocrine system kind of off in their own special section. The nervous system tends to be the hardest part of the course for everyone. I actually love the nervous system. All right, the endocrine system, this is always fun too. All the hormones, people pretty much tend to like studying the endocrine system. So we'll look at all these important organs. We'll look at our hypothalamic pituitary axis. Your hypothalamus will control your pituitary gland, which will control kind of the master gland that'll control other glands, like for instance, your thyroid gland, okay? So these serve a vital communication function. It'll help your body adjust to all the different, metabolic activity needs. It'll control many of the structural and functional changes that are occurring throughout your lifespan, throughout growth and development. And, it serves also in conjunction with your reproductive system to help with a lot of your reproductive functions. Cardiovascular system will be largely our heart and all of its blood vessels. And this is going to be the pump, the heart that moves all your bodily fluid around. So your heart pumps and helps generate the blood pressure that moves the fluid of the blood through your body. And blood's function will be to take the oxygen from the lungs that it picks up there to all the parts of your body, and then bring back, as it circulates around, coming back to your lungs to take all the carbon dioxide waste back to your lungs so you can blow it off. That's how you get rid of the excess carbon dioxide. All right, so that's its main function. But it also distributes the nutrients throughout the blood. It'll also distribute, your hormones and, important drugs when you have to take medication. All right. We'll be accessing our cardiovascular system all the time. As well, the cardiovascular system works with our integumentary system to bring the blood close to the surface level of our skin when we're hot, so we can dissipate off heat to the environment convectively, right? Or it will shunt the blood to your internal part of your body when you're cold, so your blood isn't coming in contact with the cold environment. The lymphatic system is closely associated with the cardiovascular system. As the cardiovascular system circulates all that blood around, some of the fluid of it gets forced out into the tissues. Some of it returns back to the cardiovascular system, but a lot of the fluid actually returns through the lymphatic system. And so the lymphatic system will circulate all this tissue fluid back and dump it back into the cardiovascular system, but it also kind of circulates through all your lymphatic organs, which are important for your defense system, picking up all these lovely T cells and B cells that we so need to fight off foreign invading microbes. The respiratory system will include all the upper respiratory system parts, our nasal cavity, our sinuses, your oropharynx, and moving down into the midsection of your laryngeal tracheal area, and then into the lower respiratory system of getting from the trachea down into the bronchi and into the lung tissue, where we exchange our oxygen and carbon dioxide with the cardiovascular system. The respiratory system, I like, as in doing anesthesia, this is one of the main things I would manipulate. So like I said, the main job is going to be providing oxygen, bringing it into the lungs to take to the blood, and then being able to return the carbon dioxide waste so that we can blow it off. The other important thing is, as we're moving all these gases, we also phonate by moving the various gases through our laryngeal tracheal area, our vocal cords. The digestive system, you probably know pretty well, from your teeth and tongue going down to your esophagus, through your stomach, and through all your intestines. So we'll grind up and masticate all of our food. The esophagus is the general conduit that gets it into the stomach, where we begin digesting it with all the acids and enzymes that are in there. And as we digest it and break it down into smaller particles, we finally move it into our small intestine, where we absorb the nutrients. Then from the small intestine, we'll go into the large intestine, or the colon. And in the colon is where we start forming all the waste and extracting the rest of the remaining water from the food, so that we don't lose all of our fluid through our colon, right? That would be bad. That's called diarrhea. Okay, so we want to make a compact waste is the goal there. Our gallbladder, our liver, our pancreas, all these accessory organs of our digestive system will make things like hormones, enzymes that we need to coordinate with, like absorbing our nutrition, digesting our foods, and long-term storage of our foods. Our urinary system, we kind of already talked about, with our kidneys making the urine, our ureters delivering it to our bladder stores it until we're able to urinate, and then we expel it through the urethra. Ultimately, it also controls our blood pressure. And we have several important hormones in that made with our kidney. Male reproductive organs will be our testes, our epididymis, the vas deferens and the seminal vesicles, the prostate gland making the prostatic fluid, and of course, ultimately being delivered through all these tubes to the penis. And our testicles are held inside of the scrotal sac. And of course, the ultimate goal of this is reproduction, with the men producing sperm. Female organs, the ovaries making the eggs delivered to our uterine tubes, and the baby can implant in the uterus. Of course, the conduit into all the reproductive system is the vagina, and the mammary glands serve the nutritional functions for the baby. We'll go through all this. We'll go through the development of the eggs and the sperm, and also talk a lot through the semester about how we produce the milk for the growing baby. And that brings us all back to that concept of homeostasis. So again, all of our body systems will work together to maintain a stable environment. But remember, this is a dynamic process. It's always fluctuating back and forth, kind of around set points. All right. We try to always come back to the set point, but don't get the idea that it's static. All right. The stable internal environment is where our cells are going to live. I see this slip down somehow in here. So this would be our cells being bound inside of this permeable membrane. We'll talk a lot about the membrane in lab today. This permeable membrane is going to allow some things to get in and other things to exit the cell or get in and out of the organelles within a cell. And we want to keep that stable internal environment. We'll see how inside of our cells, potassium will be high, whereas outside of our cells, potassium will be low. Outside of our cells, sodium will be high, but inside of our cells, sodium will be low. And every now and then we'll do things like in our nerve cells, we'll have an influx of sodium that will allow an electric signal to pass through the cell called an action potential, which is how one nerve cell communicates with another, or how a nerve cell communicates with a muscle cell. All right. All right, so this idea of homeostasis, well, you know, why did we talk so much about it and getting back to our set points? Because there's lots of wackadoodle things that people will tell you out there in the world, you know, to start doing. There was a big fad years ago to get colonics, because saying that, oh, people are, you know, curing all this, you know, bacteria and stuff in your colon, and we need to wash that out and cleanse that for you. And it's like, really? You want to get rid of the bacteria from my colon? I don't think so. I kind of like my microbiome being in there, making my vitamin K and some of my B vitamins for me, you know? The idea of homeostasis, when they talk you into going on some crazy diet that's saying, oh, you need to, you know, to get healthy, you need an alkaline diet. Huh? You mean my body has no ability to regulate its own pH? That if I start eating more alkaline or basic foods, that I'm going to somehow alkalinize my whole entire body? Isn't that part of what my kidney does? Is help me control my acid-base balance? So hopefully, you know, things will make more sense, and you'll start to see what are some of these crazy concepts that they try to sell you on. That your body has this ability to auto-regulate, you know, and keep and maintain your pH at the pH that we like to live at. So we like to live around 7.35 to 7.45. It kind of depends, you know, every individual hospital lab kind of calibrates their equipment a little bit differently. So we always have a range in our pHs, and, you know, it varies from institution to institution, but we like to think around here, you know. And so this is where we stay as humans, and we get excited when somebody's pH tends to be, you know, on the alkaline side or on the acid side. Somebody's diabetic and they end up in diabetic ketoacidosis. So they are acidotic. Their pH is below 7.35. That's exciting. That's an ICU admission, okay? We'll talk a lot about membrane permeability and gradients. So what's a gradient? A gradient means that there's something that changes over distance or time, okay? So if you have ombre hair or an ombre pattern to your dress, it might be dark up here. And if it were, say, green, it would go from dark green to getting lighter and lighter green as you move away from the initial maybe neck of the dress, okay? Ombre. That would be a color gradient. If I were to spray perfume at the head of the room, the people sitting in the front seat would smell the perfume as all those molecules dissipate in a gradient from the point where I sprayed it. Eventually, it would spread, but it would take some time as it needed to travel distance, those molecules, to the back of the room, okay? So that's a gradient, and that's a specific type of gradient. It could be a concentration gradient. If I spray a little, you could smell it maybe at the front of the room, but not at the back of the room, maybe ever, okay? But if I spray a lot of it, higher concentration, that gradient is going to be bigger, and the people in the back of the room will smell it much more quickly, okay? So we'll talk about the concept of moving down a concentration gradient, because this is how molecules or particles will tend to move. So always think of that little spraying the perfume sample. It's like a real life concentration gradient, and the molecules diffuse and fill up the room. They're contained by the space of the room. But if you open the door, of course, now the molecules will dissipate out the door and will eventually over time be less in the room. And this is how we deal with a noxious smell, right? A noxious gas or overwhelming, if you get stuck in an elevator with a teenage boy and he has all that Axe cologne stuff on him, you can't wait for that elevator door to open back up, right? And let that smell dissipate out of the elevator. We also talk about pressure gradients, okay? So a pressure gradient, I always think of a garden hose. We have all that water sitting at the pipe level under pressure in the pipe. And as soon as you open the spigot on your garden hose, it too is going to move down its gradient and move into the hose where there is no water, there is no pressure. So it moves from high pressure to low pressure. And this is how fluid moves through a contained cylinder. You can see how the same concept will be from the heart pumping through the hose that is our aorta, all right, under pressure. So membrane permeability will be like a filter or a barrier that you'll see how substances move into the membrane of our cell and out of the membrane of our cell. Our cell's trying to keep that stable internal environment. So the things that it wants to keep inside the cell, it's not going to let move outside of the cell. Things that it wants to move in the cell, like water, it's going to let freely move in and out through the membrane, okay? Things that it wants to let maybe move in, but it wants to really regulate or control it, it might have, some sort of gating mechanism, some control point for letting things in. So we'll talk about what's truly permeable that can freely move, or what is selectively permeable, where we have a lot of regulation, okay? And then of course, there will be substances that will be impermeant. We'll talk throughout the semester about cell differentiation that leads to the special organ functions that we have. So stem cells are what we call pluripotent cells. they have the ability to become any type of cell. They can do anything. This is why stem cell research is the holy grail, particularly for neural disorders. We're hoping that we can somehow find ways to implant and cause those cells to differentiate into the cells that are damaged in the nervous system. All right. So cell differentiation, these cells can become more and more specialized, and they develop a specific function, and they lose their ability to do other things. So a cell might become specialized to be contractile and become a muscle cell, which is highly different from something like a nervous cell, nervous system cell, a neuron that is going to fire action potentials and release neurotransmitters for communication from one neuron to another. All right. So differentiation is the process of turning these cells from a cell that's pluripotent, could be anything, could serve any sort of function, to being a specialized cell. Okay. And sometimes, we can take cells and kind of reprogram it to express earlier genes to be more pluripotent. That's another type of manipulation. But ultimately, how cells differentiate is they turn on one subset of their genes, and they become a cell that turns on maybe the genes for making lots of actin and myosin to become a muscle cell. Okay. Or maybe it's a cell that turns on a lot of genes to be making hormones to become some sort of endocrine secreting cell. Characteristics of life are going to be all things that are living will grow, okay? And anything that is living is going to be able to reproduce and be responsive to its environment. It will also have the ability to move about its environment. Metabolism is going to be the sum of the chemical reactions in a living system. And we subdivide metabolism into two types, basically anabolism and catabolism. We'll talk about this more when we do the chemistry review, but anabolism, think of anabolic steroids building up, okay? These are reactions that create new macromolecules. Catabolism is when we want to take macromolecules and break it down, typically to extract the energy from those macromolecules. This is, digestion is part of catabolism in that sense. So your book goes through how human life is going to depend on chemicals. The specific chemicals that it depends on will be obviously water. If there is no water, there is no life. This is why when we send the Mars rover up, the first thing they are looking for is there water on Mars? Because we know if there is no water, there is no life, okay? So they were very excited to find water on Mars. Water is the most abundant chemical in living systems. It's the universal solvent. We're primarily water, okay? Our blood is primarily blood cells and various products suspended in water, all right? Along with that, other chemicals, of course, are important, like obviously exchanging oxygen and carbon dioxide, which we talked about a little while ago. Living things are also going to depend upon heat. We're going to produce heat as a byproduct of metabolic reactions. So all these chemicals, all the nutrition, that you take in, the chemical reactions are largely going to be spontaneous and releasing the heat as you break down macromolecules into smaller molecules. And everything in life is under a pressurized system, and pressure is going to be, there's a force being exerted on the object. So here on Earth, we have atmospheric pressure. It's the force exerted on the surface by the air above it and the pull of gravity toward the Earth. And This is what's going to allow gas to get exchanged in your lung. All right. So when we expand our lungs and open it up, creating a bigger volume, air gets sucked in. All right. And when we push up with our diaphragm, making our whole lung capacity smaller, air passively is released out of our lungs. All right. We also have hydrostatic pressure. This would be like the pressure in the garden hose or the pressure generated by your heart to propel the fluid around your body. It's what generates your blood pressure. So again, all this is homeostatic mechanisms helping us maintain our stable internal environment. And remember, it's always a dynamic process, and as such, it's regulated. So we're going to have feedback systems, negative and positive, mostly negative. Okay, we have two things that are positive feedback systems in our body. We'll learn what those two are. So you'll always know everything else where it's through negative feedback. And we'll talk about negative feedback in a minute. All right. But it's everything that once our system gets perturbed or deviated, we try to always bring it back to normal. So we have systems that are auto-regulated or intrinsic. And this is where your organ system will have like an automated response to an environmental change. So for example, if you get you exercise a lot and you get a low oxygen tension in your muscles, and you probably have a concomitant high level of carbon dioxide, lactic acid, other things in your muscles. Your muscles, the blood coming to it, it will respond by dilating the blood vessels to bring more blood into it to deliver more oxygen to the oxygen-starved tissues. Happens automatically. It's auto-regulated. It's intrinsic to the tissue. We also have extrinsic regulation. And this is where another organ system might superimpose some control on a different system. Usually it's going to be the nervous system and the endocrine systems. For instance, when you're exercising, your nervous system and the hormones of your endocrine system will tell your heart to pump faster, to deliver more of that blood to the muscles to help bring that oxygen in there. So when we talk about homeostasis, we'll talk about this controller system where you have a receptor, a control center, and an effector. The receptor is going to perceive the change. You'll have, internal receptors in your body as well as external receptors. We'll talk a lot about receptors at some point. And they pick up and detect, whoa, there's been a change. So maybe picking up and detecting there's a temperature change. This will send a message to the control center. The control center for detecting temperature change is ultimately the hypothalamus in your brain. And that hypothalamus will then kind of integrate all this information it's taken in, and it will send out new messages to the effectors. Things like your muscles saying, kind of pump harder and warm this body up, all right? Generate some heat. And that response will bring your body temperature back toward the set point, okay? So that's a negative feedback mechanism as well. Negative feedback opposes the variation that already happened. So your temperature is detected as cold. Hypothalamus sends back message telling your muscles to generate, bring heat. It's opposing the variation that you experienced. This is how most systems actually work, okay? In a house, your furnace works through a negative feedback system in a similar manner. The thermometer detects, oh my gosh, it's too cold in this house. I have the AC here as the example, but we'll keep it with what we just did with the body. And as soon as the temperature the thermometer in your house detects that the temperatures drop below the set point, your furnace kicks on. And then you feel the gas blowing out and you hear it in your house, and it'll warm up your house for a while. And then when it reaches a set point, maybe you have your temperature set at 70, suddenly the furnace kicks off and you rest easy for a while until again, the temperature drops back down and it periodically kicks back on. In your body, we just kind of went through it, but here, let's do the example of your skin receptors, tell your brain, your control center, the thermostat in your hypothalamus that you're too hot. The effectors that it might send the message out to would be your sweat glands. Let's evaporate away some heat, carry some of the heat out with that evaporative gas and carrying the heat away from your body, as well as telling your blood vessels to relax, to dilate, to bring the blood up closer to your skin and cool it off, okay? Negative feedback is always more common than positive feedback. So if ever you're in a testing situation, you have to guess negative if you just don't know, okay? Here in negative feedback, the effector that has been activated by the command center is going to negate what the receptors had picked up, okay, opposing it. It's working to minimize the change that occurred and bring the body back to the set point at homeostasis, keeping it all within that normal range. So we'll see a lot of our hormones will work through negative feedback loops. Your hypothalamus, you'll learn, will release thyroid releasing hormone. The thyroid releasing hormone travels down a short blood pathway over to your pituitary gland and will stimulate your pituitary gland to release thyroid stimulating hormone. This will go out and travel through the blood to your thyroid gland, which then stimulates your thyroid gland to produce what we think of as our active thyroid hormones, T3 and T4. And these go out to the peripheral tissues that start and boost the metabolism out in our peripheral tissues. T3 and T4, when they get up in high levels out in our blood going to our tissues, some of that travels through the blood back to the pituitary gland and says, woo, we got a lot of T3 and T4 out here. You can shut this thing down now. You don't have to keep cranking out any more TSH. It'll also send blood back over to your hypothalamus saying, whoop, detecting high level of T3 and T4. We got enough out here. You can shut down cranking out this thyroid releasing hormone. Negative feedback, okay? Positive feedback, more unusual. We'll talk about it in the sense of blood clotting and oxytocin in delivering a baby. Yes, those of you who've had Pitocin, it's the same thing as oxytocin. It's just the synthetic form we give to women who need a little extra boost in laboring. So positive feedback, instead of negating the change, it actually goes with the change experienced by the stimulus. So you can see why this is not something that happens a lot. But say you're starting to labor and you are experiencing those contractions, your body's kicking out some oxytocin, rather than negating the oxytocin and shutting it back down and returning toward normal, it's going to speed up the release of more oxytocin so that you go from little labor contractions to bigger and more frequent labor contractions until you kick that baby out, right? Same thing with blood clotting. We want to start a little clot. We don't want to negate it right away. We want to keep the clotting going and forming till we form a nice clot to, stop to have hemostasis so we don't bleed out when we have a cut. Okay, so you see here, you have your damaged cells in the wall of a blood vessel, and you're going to have some little localized chemical hormones that start out and start promoting the formation of a clot. And this will have a positive feedback loop where clotting gets accelerated for a while, but eventually we do have some negative feedback that comes in here and will shut off blood clotting, because we certainly don't want to clot off the whole vessel. We just want to patch the outside of the vessel. We don't want to throw clots everywhere. So our feedback systems will work to integrate all these systems to maintain homeostasis. We have this dynamic equilibrium where we're kind of going back and forth to keep forces in balance, to keep us within a kind of normal range. Failure to restore homeostasis results in pathology, disease, or even death. All right, so when we get into anatomy, we have a lot of terminology we'll learn. You have a nice little glossary at the end of your book. And so there'll be probably some new words for you, and you need to start learning those words. This is a good place to make flashcards, quiz yourself, have somebody else quiz you, okay? So superficial anatomy, we'll spend some time on locating structures near the body surface. You know, we see that mostly in clinical situations. We have to start either opening people up or ordering imaging to see internal anatomy. So one of the places that we have some superficial anatomy is when you want to listen to somebody's heart, okay? You don't just randomly listen willy-nilly. You have to know where the heart underlies the superficial anatomy. So when we see the sternum here, we know that over here on the right-hand side, the person's right-hand side, not your right-hand side, we have this first position right here between the 1, 2, 3, you can count it. So it's between the second and third costal, which are costal means ribs, you'll learn, interspace. And here we can detect hearing the aortic valve, okay? So this is why you kind of listen in these 4 spots. All right, you move to the other side of the sternum so that you can listen to the pulmonic valve. All right, and then we have to go further down. So we're at 3, 4, 5, right? So you're listening between 5 and 6, again to the left-hand side of the sternum. And this is where we listen to the tricuspid valve, okay? And then going down a little bit further, almost towards your armpit, is we're listening to the mitral valve, the left side of the heart, the right side of the heart, okay? And this is where we learn how to find our heart valves from the external anatomy, so we listen. The way to remember it when we want to is the good mnemonic device, all physicians take money, APTM. You won't forget that one now, right? All right. All right, so a lot of what you're going to occupy your time with for these next few days is learning some of this terminology. So let's go through it. Anatomic position. Whenever we describe someone in anatomic position, they're going to be standing up. We usually I make you usually do this in class. So you have to stand up with your palms out, your arms out at your side, your palms facing out with your thumbs pointing outward, okay? That is anatomic position. So in anatomic position, your thumbs going out to the side is lateral. Your pinky will be more medial. Question that often tricks early beginners up, okay? Supine means you're laying down, looking up at the ceiling. Prone, you're down like that, right? Face down. We're going to look at different anatomic quadrants and regions. Quadrants, we divide our abdominal pelvic area into 4 regions, quadrants. And when we do it in regions, we have 9 of them. We'll also learn all of our terms for anatomic directions. Okay, so it's usually in reference to a point, and you think of like the middle of your body as the midpoint. So anything sort of going up from the breastbone goes up, going up, superior, going down, inferior, going out to the sides, lateral, going in toward the midline, medial. Okay, so if I say you're going to make an incision in the sternum, is that going to be lateral or medial for my arms?
Medial.
Medial, yep, okay. And is my head superior or inferior to my belly button?
Superior.
There you go, okay. Is my pinky finger more proximal or more distal than my elbow to
It's more
my
distal.
shoulder? Your
Distal.
pinky finger is more
Distal.
distal than is your elbow. Okay. All right. So it's kind of a relative term. All right. We're also going to have to learn what are the technical terms for our body regions. So frontal, right? The backside can be either dorsal or caudal. You can call it ventral or anterior for the front of your body. You'll have your oral region. Your mouth could be called, your cheeks will be the buccal area. Your ears are the otic area. So go through all these. This is simple memorization, but you need to know it. And this is part of what our first lab is going to be. I kind of combined our first labs. The directions for the anatomy coordinators put out is just to do our second lab of membrane transport, but we have a lot of membrane transport on your connect work. So I really wanted to focus a little bit more on this because quite frankly, you're going to use this a whole lot more in your everyday life, referring to these areas. So you need to know them. Okay. And you need to know them pretty soon. All right. So I'm not going to belabor this because you can read and look at this. Our quadrants. Okay, so the quadrant where your spleen is, right below your heart, is going to be your left upper quadrant. Right below that, your left lower quadrant. Where your liver is on the right side of your body, you might not even know that yet, but you will. You better know where the liver is by the time you get out of this class. Your liver is in your right upper quadrant. Okay, your left lower quadrant. Below that is going to be where your belly button is. Now, when you're looking at a picture here, your hand, your left hand, this gets confusing for people, but you always do it on the picture or the patient that you see depicted here, their right side. Okay, so it'll be your left side, but it's their left, but we call it the right upper quadrant, referring to the patient. This gets confusing when you start reading x-rays, and especially if you're studying a lot and you get tired, you forget about that. So pay attention. All right, our regions. All right, so you can see where we had our quadrants now are divided into 9 different regions. So right hypochondriac region, hypochondriac, right? Okay, why is this called hypochondriac? Why do we get the name for somebody who makes up a whole bunch of symptoms or thinks they're always sick all the time? Because the hypochondriac region is the belly region. And what's the number one thing, non-specific symptoms that people with hypochondria always have? Belly stuff that they complain about, right? Okay, so that's where the term hypochondriac comes from. So the right hypochondriac region, the left hypochondriac region. Epigastric. Gastric means stomach, and your stomach is right about here, okay? Epi means at the tip. So right at the tip of your stomach, epigastric, okay?
This is a random question, but I was just curious. We actually had a diagnostic term for hypochondria before we had anatomical regions. Actually labeled.
Huh?
I was just confused. You said that.
I'm saying the derivation of the word for hypochondria, you know, we all know what hypochondria is because it's in common parlance, right?
Yeah.
So everybody knows hypochondriacs kind of make up their symptoms, but the real term hypochondriac region, hypochondriac, means belly. Okay, it's referring to your belly region here.
Oh,
It's
okay.
why
Yeah, I
we-
was just
Why we
confused.
call people who make up symptoms hypochondriacs is because usually typically all their symptoms come in are non-specific belly related. So that's
Okay.
where that name came from. Okay.
Okay, that was, thank
All
you.
right.
I was just confused if it was a chicken or the egg situation.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. All right. The umbilical region is obviously because this is where the belly button is, right? The umbilicus, all right, or umbilicus, whichever way you want to pronounce it. Here, this is called the left lumbar region. Remember, patient's left and right lumbar region. And here, right inguinal region, left inguinal region, and this is hypogastric. If this is epigastric at the above tip, hypo means below. So below, okay, the gastric region. Hypochondriac, hypo below, chondro meaning ribs. So right underneath the ribs. All right. All right, now you can see what organs are underneath each specific quadrant. So like you can look here and see your liver kind of spans across several quadrants right here. And some people, like people with cirrhosis, alcoholics, you know, their liver can get really big and hang all the way down to their umbilical region. All right, so that would be pathology that you could identify just from superficial anatomy and feeling around and feeling a big bulky liver in there. All right, here's where your stomach is. Okay, so your stomach is largely in the hypochondriac region, right over here. Okay, and epigastric. So you can go there and kind of like figure out kind of relatively where every term is. Now again, using our descriptive terms. So proximal or distal. Distal is at a distance, farther away. Okay, you could say that Chicago is more distal from Ann Arbor than is Grand Rapids. Okay, medial, moving toward the midline. Lateral, moving away from the midline. Proximal, again, is moving back up toward the center of the body. Distal, moving away from the center of the body. Sorry, I have a little bit of a hyperactive mouse. I've tried to reset it and stuff. I have a new computer and I'm not completely used to this mouse yet. Cranial, cephalic, right? Going toward the head. Caudal literally is used more often of going toward the tail, okay? So like if you were really referring to moving toward the toes or something, you'd probably describe the foot as being distal. But if I told you that I was going to do a caudal anesthesia block, where do you think I would be putting the anesthesia in?
Lower spine,
Yeah,
Lower back.
toward the tail. So this is like a common block you would put in a baby as we go up in like through the sacrum. Okay. So toward the tail. All right. Anterior or ventral toward the belly, posterior or dorsal toward the back. Kind of anterior and posterior, more human terms, ventral and dorsal, more for animal, but we still use it interchangeably. And you can always think of like the dorsal fin on a shark, right? All right, sectional anatomy, you kind of got to get a little bit used to it because how we, we'll be seeing the cadaver, we'll also be looking at models and that, but you really don't tend to see most people this way unless you spend all your time in a surgical suite. We will see most people's internal anatomy by ordering images, and we order them in different cuts and planes to see, what space that tumor might be taking up in there. So we want to get a idea in 3 dimensions. So we have to order multiple planes of pictures. All right. So we'll look at the different sections and pictures for, when you want to see these, visualize these things by MRIs, PET scans, CT scans. All right. So we have to always talk about our transverse section or transverse plane going cut right through. So if you do a transverse section through a banana, you end up with little rings of a banana, right? if you do a longitudinal section right here, or like a mid-sagittal, okay? Sagittal is kind of also a longitudinal section going right through the main axis, mid-sagittal. In a banana, you would end up with like a banana split, okay? And then you could do a frontal or coronal. So I'm going to just cut off the face, right? Make a slice here. That would be frontal or coronal plane. And you can think of it as the X, the Y, and the Z axis. Right here would be like Z coming through, okay? Y axis, X axis, to give you your 3 dimensions. And then we have our body cavities. All right, now all of our organs rest in specific cavities that encase the organs, help protect them from shock, help limit their movement around, but also permits them to move and expand and do their organ activities. We have our main ventral cavity derived from developmentally what we call the coelom. Okay, our ventral cavity contains above the diaphragm our thoracic cavity, where our lungs and our heart will be, and below the diaphragm our abdominal pelvic cavity. All of our cavities are going to be lined with membranes, and they will be serous membranes. Serous membranes are membranes that are slippery and wet. They produce serous fluid that lubricates it. And that's really important because we don't want a lot of friction over all of our organs. Serum derived from, serous derived from serum. It's an exudate of that fluid, okay? Serum. And all of it will line the inside of the cavity, but it will also reflect back on the organs and line the organs themselves. So we call the layer that lines the actual cavity the parietal layer. And then the part that lines the organs themselves will be the visceral layer. And you can refer to your organs just as the viscera, okay? Viscera refers to organs. So I put this on here so I'm still sharing, right? So
Yes.
if you wanted to draw it in, we could draw in the cavity, our parietal lining the cavity in which our lungs are, right? And it would line the outer part of the cavity. And then if we wanted to then reflect it back, and it bends over and then lines on the viscera of encasing on the organs itself. So this would be the visceral. Okay, not drawing so well, but you get the idea, okay? Does that help you get the idea there?
Yes.
All right. Oh, I didn't want to start back from the beginning. Hang on. Let's go. Click the wrong button here. All right. So our ventral cavity is containing kind of all of our abdominal and chest organs. Our chest organs are in the thoracic cavity. Our thoracic cavity will be subdivided into other cavities. So it will contain the right pleural cavity containing our right lung, and the left pleural cavity containing the left lung. In between the two pleural cavities that are both inside the thorax, we have a little cavity in the middle, and that's called our mediastinum. The mediastinum is going to contain the very important organs of the heart, the esophagus, the trachea, and the great blood vessels. In the lower portion of that, where the heart is, we call that the pericardial cavity, okay? The pericardial cavity. So you can see in here. So this whole thing is called our ventral cavity. And up here we have our thoracic cavity, of which we're going to have just the pleural cavity containing each lung, the two pleural cavities. And then you have the mediastinum in the middle, and the lower part of that will be the pericardial cavity. Below the diaphragm, you have the abdominal pelvic cavity. And it really is kind of one cavity. We just kind of mark it where the hip bone, you can see right here, the crest, the iliac crest of the hips coming up here and kind of being the artificial dividing line for the abdominal contents above it and the pelvic cavity contents below that. And this is how, through development and organ development, the organ will come and kind of push through that developing lining from the embryonic tissues, and part of the layers stay reflected or stuck to on the organ itself, like the heart, and then the other layer goes to surround the outside, you know, of the cavity, lining the cavity itself, and form the parietal layer. In between the two layers, there will always be some type of serous fluid that will make it a frictionless surface. For instance, for the heart to move and beat back and forth within the pericardial cavity. All right. Now we can look through and see how important it's going to be to have, say, a transverse section. Here you're having a transverse section. When you take and look at these transverse sections, typically on, you know, a CT scan or an MRI, we're looking from the feet up toward the head. So this would be, you know, looking at the bottom side of the heart, for instance, the right lung and the left lung. So you can see how the layers of the muscle, okay, are forming around here. What kind of bones do you think these are embedded in the layers of the muscle right around the lungs?
The ribs?
Exactly, the ribs. What's this back here, do you think?
Spinal cord.
Vertebrae?
Yeah, this is a vertebrae, and right in here is the spinal cord. Yep, running it inside, protected by the vertebrae. These are your big back muscles. Okay, good. All right, the lining of the abdominal pelvic cavity is called the peritoneal cavity. It's the chamber that's actually inside that abdominal pelvic cavity, and the lining itself is called the parietal peritoneum. And how it reflects back and lines over the organs, it's then called the visceral peritoneum. Okay, so peritoneum. All right, so like I said, the abdominal portion of the cavity is above the pelvic bones, or basically above the crest of your hip bones. Okay, the iliac crest is what it's called. And it contains basically all your digestive organs. Behind the peritoneum in the abdomen will be a couple of organs, and they only have peritoneum over the front side. They're not actually contained within your abdominal contents cavity itself, and that would be your kidneys. So we call them retroperitoneal. Retro, like retro vintage clothing, looking back. So it's to the back, okay, or behind, retro. So behind the peritoneum, all right? So your kidneys are your classic retroperitoneal organ. If ever you see the word retroperitoneal, almost immediately you'll think kidneys. Part of the ureters, part of the digestive tract, some of the colon will be a little bit retroperitoneal, but most of it comes back in and is within the peritoneal cavity. But your kidneys, your pancreas too, is retroperitoneal. The pelvic cavity below the hip bones, okay, contains all the pelvic structures, your reproductive organs, the bladder, and the rectum portion of your digestive tract. Keeping track of time. So let's look at some things. I love to bring in x-rays and stuff. All right, so what cavities do you see here? What cavity would be out here?
Isn't that the thoracic cavity?
Yep, this whole thing is the thoracic cavity. Now, if I just want to look over to this side right here, what would you call this cavity? Containing the lung, the left lung. This would be the left pleural cavity. Okay, pleural means lung. So the pleural cavity, left pleural cavity, right pleural cavity. What's the cavity right here in the center? Between the two lung cavities, the pleural cavities.
Mediastinum.
Yep, the mediastinum.
Mediastinum.
Yep, yep. Okay, and the lower part of the mediastinum right down here. What's this big boot hanging out here? This is the heart, so this is the pericardial cavity. All right, what do you think is going on right here? What's this dividing line going across the X-ray?
Diaphragm.
The
Abdominopelvic.
diaphragm. So if this is the thoracic cavity, down below it, this is which cavity?
Abdominopelvic.
Okay, great. What's this cavity right here? What's this? It's all dark and translucent like air here in the lungs. What do you think that is? Just trying to take a stab. Take a stab. Just guess. Don't be scared. So what makes your lungs translucent? What's in your lungs?
Air.
Air.
Yeah, air,
Air.
an air
So-
bubble,
So what do you think this is?
air.
Air
Air. So where might you have some air?
in your digestive tract and your colon.
Exactly. Okay, but it's not in your colon, it's in your stomach. This is what you belch back up, right? This is a gastric air bubble. And you look for this and you can always see the thin layer of the diaphragm over it. And you don't have one on your left side because on your right side, because this is your liver over here. So this is your gastric air bubble. All right. Cool. All right. What do you see here? What's this arrow pointing to?
Lung.
Okay. What's this? What's this right up here?
Oh, is that a stomach? I really can't tell.
Well, what's it look like?
No clue.
This look like stomach, right? With the gastric air bubble. And to you, that looks like stomach, right? With the gastric air bubble. But what's wrong here? Well,
It's really high.
Farther up.
yeah. How do you think the stomach could end up on top of the lung?
Well, no, not
No,
normal.
is that the heart?
And what's all this down here?
Air,
Is that the
gas
air?
bubbles.
This air in what?
Your intestines.
Yeah, exactly. So if we look back up here, you have air up here. You got some air going down here and through the intestines. Compare this nice normal radiograph with some strange crap going on here, right?
Yes.
So this is called a volvulus, and this is where the stomach traveled up through what's called the hiatus in the diaphragm, a little hole that your esophagus travels through to get down to your stomach. And with a hiatal hernia, your stomach comes right back up through the hiatus and ends up in your lung. You think that's uncomfortable?
Very.
Yeah, you think you want to eat a nice spicy Mexican dinner if you have that?
No.
Yeah, I don't think so, right?
There'll be a lot of heartburn.
Yeah. Well, and you see, it kind of actually shifts the position of the heart, right? So the normal position of the heart is to the left side, right? To the left of
Mhm.
your spine. What's happened to the
Yeah.
heart over here?
It pushed it to the right.
Yeah. You know, and these are about similarly sized persons too. They look like to me. All right. So can you look at this picture? Can you tell me if this is a man or a lady looking at this picture?
Looks maybe a lady.
Yeah, a lady. Why?
Seems to be maybe the outline of a breast.
Exactly, right here. Do you see
Yeah.
an outline of a breast over here?
Sort of, like it's very hard to tell, but kind of towards the right hand side, you can see the little dip.
A little dip right here.
Yeah.
I suspect this is a person who might have had a partial mastectomy. So yes, you can kind of see the little dip right here, but you don't see nearly as much tissue as you see over here. So I'm guessing this is kind of an old lady. I see a little bit of osteoporosis in here. So you can tell a lot on an x-ray, you know, looking at, but she's got a volvulus.
How do you see osteoporosis in the bones? Like,
Well,
what
I can
is
see
it
that
for?
it's kind of thinned out. It's translucent right here.
Oh, okay.
So-
Yeah, I
so-
see that on the clavicle bones. Yeah.
Yep, on the clavicle. Okay. All right. So just some little things. So, you know, take a stab. All right. So what do you want to start studying? So you want to get down the concept of homeostasis, and with that, the positive and negative feedback. And you really want to start learning these terms. Okay. So the lab you'll be doing for those who are coming to lab today and those coming Thursday then will be this anterior, posterior, distal, superior, inferior, and also like all the regions. So buccal, gluteal, you know, sural, crural, all these regional terms, planes of the sections. This is what you want to start getting used to. And it's kind of fun because you feel like these are going to be terms that you'll use your entire career. So you want to get used to it. You want to know, you know, if you're the one who's stuck like holding the retractor in a surgery and the surgeon tells you to, you know, pull the retractor, you know, laterally and, you know, tells you to sponge off something that's, you know, medial to the medial and superior of where his scalpel is, you really want to kind of know what you're doing, right? The surgeons, I can tell you, can be, I've seen them make nurses cry, surge techs cry. You know, they get under stress and they sometimes are not always so nice to the people in the operating room. I'm used to my name just being anesthesia. Even when they know you for 10 years or whatever, they just still, anesthesia, do this, anesthesia, do that. So, all right, let's go over a couple of practice questions in a little bit of time we have left and see what we learned today. All right, so the analysis of the internal structure of individual cells is called individual cells. So we're talking about cells.
Cytology.
Cellular anatomy is cytology.
Cytology.
Yep. What's histology?
Tissue.
Tissue. Embryology.
Embryos.
Embryos.
Embryos, developing fetuses, right? Physiology.
Function.
Structure and function.
And anatomy.
Function.
There you go.
Structure.
All right. We always want to know why the right answers are right and why the wrong answers are wrong. Okay. And what do we have here? My little thing. Cardiovascular function is an example of
Organ physiology.
System.
Physiology.
system physiology.
System.
Yep. Trip you up there a little bit. Okay. So system physiology. Cardiac physiology would be,
Organ.
yes. Okay. All right. The study of the liver is to gross anatomy. What the study of a liver cell is to
Cytology.
Yeah, cytology. I agree.
yeah. Histology probably actually would have been a better term there, but the closest thing would have been cytology. Which of the following is arranged in correct order from most complex down to the simplest?
Most complex.
E.
So
E.
organism to system to organ, tissue, yeah, E. Okay. All right, which organ system provides support, protection of soft tissue, stores minerals, and forms the blood cells?
T.
Skeletal.
Skeletal, which, you know, I had an Australian lab TA, skeletal. That's how they say it, believe it or not, skeletal. The kidneys and the ureters are organs of which system?
Urinary.
Urinary.
Exactly. All right. So I have to move the band here. It's over. A chemical imbalance in the body can cause the heart to stop pumping blood, which in turn will cause other tissues and organs to cease functioning. This observation will support the view that
E.
E.
all the levels of organization are interdependent. Yeah, blood doesn't have magical properties. This doesn't have anything to do with chemicals making up the cells. you know, or about organisms being composed of cells, nothing to do with congenital defects. So it's the only thing that makes sense. The maintenance of a relatively constant internal environment is,
B.
Homeostasis.
yes, our ding, 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 winner, winner, chicken dinner, right? Okay, so Tuesday lab people, you can come back here at 1 o'clock for the next time. It won't be a real long time today. Thursday lab people, if you prefer to come today and get it over with, you can do that. You know, we can have as many people as we want on Zoom. So, you know, if you just want to have that off and then just come back for a lecture on Thursday morning, that's fine as well. All right. So make sure you do the orientation quiz and make sure that you understand the syllabus, kind of read through that and look at the schedule. And if you have questions about it, ask during lab time, because we have more time to go over that if you need to. Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. I'll see you on Thursday.
All right.
Thank
See you
you.
guys later. Bye-bye.
I have questions
Yeah.
about, can I stay here like
Yeah, stay on Zoom. We'll keep asking. Go ahead.
first, like I'm gonna show you what I wanna ask. During like the Blackboard, I went to the ebook, but I cannot
You can't get in?
yeah, like I signed in, but
Okay.
I just have like I see titles like lab 1, but I don't know how to go to see all
The ebook? Okay, here, I'll show you. I'll try to get back in there and share. Let's see. New share. Are you seeing my Blackboard?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So if you get into Blackboard, yours will look a little bit different on these buttons over here. Click on McGraw-Hill
did.
Connect Access. All right. Whoa, why do I get an error on that? Okay, let's see. Oh, I got to sign back into Blackboard. Hang on. All right. Let's get down here to class. All right. So back to McGraw-Hill Connect. When you
Yeah.
go here, hit the go to my Connect section.
Yeah, I did that.
All right. And then right here, does it come up
Yeah,
looking
show
like?
me just a picture. Like it's
So I click on that and then it comes right in here.
I have a Chromebook. Maybe that's why I cannot.
Can't get through to it.
Yeah, I don't see. I just see a picture. I have a Chromebook. Maybe that's why.
You know, that would be a question for the publisher, I guess. There is like a help section. Now, when you went back there, if I get out of this and I go back, you get all the rest of this, right? Where you see the lab.
Yeah, I see all the titles like lab 1, everything, but I cannot.
But you
go
can't
in
click on this and get the ebook, huh?
Yeah, I did this too. I just see a picture. I couldn't like now you opened like the whole book.
Uh-huh.
I couldn't. I
Okay.
tried.
So that's going to be a question for the publisher, and I'm going to find out how to get you in contact with that person. So it just says green room up here. To which student am I speaking?
Yeah, you speaking with him. I gonna change that. It was my daughter.
Okay.
Like, I gonna change it. Yeah.
All right, so I'll try to find the publisher's email address and link you up with them, our help person, so that they can kind of help you figure out how you can get into that. But at least for now, did you get the email in which I sent the first couple of chapters? So that you're not getting behind.
I don't know why, like just yesterday night, I could see everything on the Blackboard, the course, our material, when I sent you an email.
Uh-huh.
I don't know why. So I have questions also, like for this week, we should just do the quiz number 1 or 2.
Yeah, so, okay, so here, I'll go back to, let me see, new share. Let me see, I'll bring up the lab. Hang on. All right. so you get your schedule. And your schedule will look like this. So on your schedule, it'll show you, this week, take the orientation quiz, okay? And start reading, chapters 1, chapter 2,
Got it.
reviewing the chemistry. Then we're going to do this lab on either today or Thursday. And this lab will be due on Monday, the 24th. And do the connect for week number 2, which is lab 2A, lab 2B, and the quiz.
Yeah, the lab manual also in there when you show me like just now. Where is the lab manual?
Okay, so yeah, so the lab manual is back on Blackboard. So if I click here, return to Blackboard, and you go in here to labs for Bio 111. This goes through the lab instructions. And we'll do this when we get into lab too. I'll show everybody this.
Okay, because you said that we should print out the first lab, but I couldn't see anything to print.
Right. So here, lab 1 and 2, membrane transport and body orientation. When you click into it, then it gets you here to lab 1 and 2, body orientation, called the Grossman Lab Manual. I tried to put that on every lab, so that's the lab manual. Okay, so you get into here, you click on that, and you can click in here and you can download the document, which somehow is missing on this one. So I got to put it in there. All right,
Yeah.
so I'll put it in there.
Yeah, I couldn't hear you because before when I asked you about the quiz, my internet wasn't stable. So you said for this week, we should do the quiz. I couldn't hear anything.
Yeah, so you'll click in here, you'll have the lab 2 right here. These, you can click on all these. This will lead you to the labs that will take you back. If I click on this, like lab 2A, it'll go back right away over to connect. Okay. And then you can do the connect. It'll lead you to the connect assignments. Now, if I go back to Blackboard and the labs for 1 and 2, which I'll have to get the digital version in here. We'll do the lab on body orientation, lab 1 and 2, body orientation. You'll click on here and the lab will come up. Okay, but I have to put it in there. I didn't put it in there, so I need to do that after we sign off today.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's just like the assignment, it's the same as the quiz.
Well, this will be over body and orientation. You have like 4 things to do. You have this one, this lab manual one, and then you will have these 3 things in this folder called lab 2. And this will lead you, these 3 things are all going to be lab 2A, lab 2B, and lab quiz. This will take you, that's part of your connect.
Okay.
Okay, so you have the connect stuff, and then you also have a separate lab manual. But you don't have to buy the lab manual. I'll post it on here. I just have to post it over into that folder. I have to turn it on, which I haven't done yet. Which I'll do before class starts at 1.
Yeah, okay.
And we'll go over this in lab today. Okay?
Yeah.
Or in lab Thursday, whichever day you're in.
Yeah, yeah, I think I am in group A because my ID ends with a number.
Okay. And are you on Tuesday or Thursday lab?
Tuesday today.
Today. Okay. So we'll go over this with the whole class at 1 o'clock.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'll see you then. We'll go through all this with the whole class.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.